This happened a long time ago. I'm guessing back in 2006, and I can't have been any older than 4 years old at the time, yet I vividly remember the fear I felt during this encounter. It was an early summer morning, and the sun was up, but few people were out. In fact, the streets were practically dead that morning. My mum decided to take my sister, only 1 year old at the time, seated in a stroller, and I, to throw away some garbage at the garbage station. I might add that the garbage station is kind of secluded from nearby houses, bordering one of those deep, dark forests of eastern Sweden. Since I was only 4 years old when this happened, the memory of the incident has faded a lot. However, my mum remembers all of it. She says that upon entering the garbage station, she immediately got an eerie feeling of being watched. I remember that feeling too. I felt creeped out, even though I didn't know I was scared. I guess I could sense my mum's fear. Walking along that secluded garbage station, my mum suddenly stopped and told me this. She said my name. Hold on to the stroller as hard as you can and don't let go, no matter what. That's my most vivid memory that I have of this, and I don't think I'll ever forget those words. I'll at least never forget how they made me feel. It was as if my blood turned to ice. I just froze. My mum sounded stern, but even a toddler can sense when someone's scared shitless. My mum was definitely afraid of something. The rest is just a blur. I don't remember much, apart from the aforementioned, so I'll let the rest of the story be told from the perspective of my mother. This is the recollection of her experience, recalled to the best of my abilities, but in my own words. Not far from where we were standing, a truck was parked with a man seated in the front. Nothing unusual, a lot of truck drivers stopped to rest by the side of the road, but this man was staring. He wouldn't stop staring. He stared right at me, examining my body with the determined gaze of a predator, gluing at the three of us in his sight. He truly seemed pleased by the fear he instilled in our faces, and his eyes, they were something else, almost as if they didn't belong to a human, but rather to a predator to the savannah. I felt like prey, stuck in the claws of a lion. I just couldn't move. That's when he smiled at me. I remember that dead smile, those cold, calculating eyes, and the way he licked his lips, almost as if to say, I could kill you if I wanted to. I believe it was at this point in time, into the strange encounter, when my mum told me to hold on to the stroller and to hold on tightly and not let go. My mum's a small woman, 160 centimetres, weighing only about 45 kilograms, so about 5 foot tall and 100 pounds. She could have easily been overpowered by the overweight man in the truck. My mum later admitted she was afraid he'd jump out of the truck and knock her out, possibly assaulting her, or even kidnapping me or my younger sister. We bolted out of there. We didn't throw away much garbage that morning. We just turned around and walked home as fast as my mum can do with a stroller and a 4-year-old toddler by her side. We've never talked about what happened that day, until very recently. The incident has always lingered somewhere in the back of my mind as that weird thing that happened when I was a child, and every time I would pass that garbage station, I get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. As previously mentioned, this happened around 2006. Fast forward to 2008, the face of a 10-year-old little girl called Engla was printed across the front page of every newspaper in sight. She had been abducted, assaulted and murdered. The perpetrator was an overweight truck driver named Anders Eklund, now known as one of Sweden's most infamous killers. Anders Eklund was charged with the murder of Engla, along with the rape and murder of a woman named Pernilla. He's also suspected of abducting another little girl, who's still missing, making him a pedo, a serial rapist and a serial killer. My mum said that when she saw Eklund's picture in the paper, especially when she saw those cold, familiar eyes, she knew he was the creepy man from the garbage station that early morning all those years ago. Thinking of how my mum, or my sister or me, or all of us could have been his victims, that sends chills up my spine. Anders, even though you're behind bars, let's never meet again. This isn't my story, but my mother's. When my sister and her oldest brother were younger, I'm not the exact age as my siblings, but my sister was around 10 and my eldest brother is 3 years younger than her. My mum was a single mother having to raise them both. She took public transport to work. There were a lot of shady characters she met. Her worst fear, being a 5'3" girl weighing 110 pounds, was that someone would start a confrontation with her or follow her home. One night, after picking my brother and sister from daycare, they headed home and my mum was shocked to find the front door was unlocked, which was strange because she always locked her doors, but that particular morning she had been running late and figured that she forgot. Heading into the house, my mum just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off and she entered her room. That's when she noticed her dresser drawer was open and her socks, pantyhose and her underwear had been rifled through. She asked my sister, who's blind, if she'd been digging around in her dresser looking for something. My sister told her that she wouldn't dare go into her room as it was off limits, and if she had, what could she possibly have wanted out of her dresser? Just to make sure, she asked my brother if he went into her room, and my brother scoffed at the accusation. My mother then began to search under the bed, in the bathroom, and then in her closet. When she opened the closet door, the bedroom light casted just enough light inside to see the shape of a man sitting down on the floor of her closet, a pair of pantyhose pulled over his face to hide any identifying facial features. Whilst the mental image of a man with pantyhose pulled over his head might sound hilarious, the sounds of a small woman desperately closing the door and trying to keep it shut as this man began to slam his fist against the door while she screamed at her children to hide and call the police is anything but hilarious. The only reason this man didn't overpower my mother right away was because she slid down to the floor and pushed her legs against a nearby dresser to steady herself. She could soon feel him slamming his full weight against the door, and she screamed out again for my brother and sister to hide and call the police. My brother was too afraid to leave my mother alone and stayed in the room while my sister headed down the hallway and managed to find her way to the landline and dialed 911. My mother tried her best to keep the door shut, but eventually the man had thrown his weight against the door so much, forcing my mum to slide forward and, by default, pushed the dresser further and further back until it was too far back to keep my mum wedged between it and the closet. The man finally pushed against the door hard enough that he managed to get the advantage as my mother felt the door being forced open. She cut her losses and stood up, quickly running towards my brother to grab him. The man fell onto the ground as the door swung open and quickly scrambled to his feet, pushing the two out of the way as he bolted to the front door. When the police arrived, he was long gone and they never found the man. The police searched the house to see how he got in and to see if he had an accomplice with him. The only thing they could deduce is that he got in because my mother forgot to lock the door. My mum figured the man was trying to rob them and hid in the closet when they heard him come home, but the police stated that the only thing that he had gone through was my mother's dresser drawer and the drawer in the kitchen, because in the closet he was hiding they found one of my mother's kitchen knives. They wanted my mother to give a description, but she couldn't as she never clearly got a look at his face. After that happened, my mother ended up getting a Norwegian elkhound puppy to train as a guard dog, and she, as far as she knows, never encountered the man from her closet again. But part of her always wondered if he knew where she lived, because he was one of the many faces that rode public transport with her. Update: we have a big dog and guns. We switched rooms with the girls and have only had one issue since then. The pandemic has made finding a new place very difficult, but we're trying. The kids sleep in their own room now and feel safe. We've got a detective involved, but nothing's come of it. It's not my landlord. He's very old and a sick man, and he's very frail and can't get around well. About a year ago, someone knocked on my bedroom window around 8 or so. I was just sitting there watching TV and I heard it. I called husband's name and he went to check. My daughter, 13, came out of the bathroom and said she thinks that she might have heard someone knock on the bathroom window. No one was very scared by this because our neighbourhood is very active and people are always outside, so we reasoned it as just some odd noise and let it go. About an hour later, while everyone's going to bed, my daughter let out the most horrific scream I've ever heard. My husband and I run into the living room and she flings herself into my arms and faints. When she comes to, she tells us that someone banged on her window, and when she looked over, she saw a man staring at her. Of course we call the police, and my husband starts searching our property, and the house next to us has been empty for years, and calls the cops, who find nothing. The next day, we add extra locks. I nail the curtains down so they can't move, and we try to move on. About 2 weeks later, the person comes back, just tapping, and since then it's been pretty regular. Tapping, knocking, pretending to be a cat. I saw him on our porch. My 8-year-old saw him peeping through the window on the front door. We've called the police and we've stayed up all night waiting. We have hidden, trying to catch this person outside. Nothing works. No one can catch him. My kids either sleep in the living room or our bedroom. We don't go out after dark. We don't stay home alone. The cops patrol and we have a detective investigating, but he's never caught. He came back last night at 2 a.m, but the kid was too scared to get out of bed and wake us up. We're trying to move and I've ordered cameras. My landlord wouldn't let me get cameras until I had the detective call him. I'm scared to go to sleep because I don't want to miss a text message from my kid telling me that he's here and her having to be scared until she passes out. I remember this like it was yesterday, because for me it was. It was the 22nd of July 2011. I just got married to my beautiful wife at the beginning of the month, and I was just 34 years old. Have you ever wrote your thoughts down knowing you're legally dead? Neither have I until now. Like I said, it was July 2011, and I'd only been married a couple of weeks. One day, while my wife took a nap, I decided to take a walk. Right across from my house, across the street, is nothing but woods. According to Google Earth, the woods go on for a while. I may have been walking for about 30 to 45 minutes when I heard a noise. I'm not the guy who believes in ghosts or Bigfoot, and I'm not worried about other people because I always have a knife or a gun on me. I'm just not easily scared. The noise I heard wasn't like a twig snapping, leaves crunching or rocks falling. It was more of a splash. So I followed the sound and it led me to a small clearing. I saw a creek, but the water wasn't clear like you normally see. Instead it was a light greenish colour. It had a glow of fog that rose from it. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before in person, only in horror sci-fi movies. As I was looking at the creek and all of its weird wonders, I heard the splash again, and I followed the sound with my eyes and saw a downed tree. I saw parts of a person's left hand. I immediately ran over and stopped on my knees to help this guy. What I saw next still sticks with me to this day. As the guy raised his head in what I thought was an attempt to take a breath, he cut his eyes at me. Half wasted in the water, a smile formed on his face. Just as fast as I saw him, he was gone. Just disappeared into thin air. Gone. No trace of him at all. Then, in what I'm guessing was about an hour, I woke up. I know what you're thinking, it was all just a dream. But just wait. I was still in the same spot I fell asleep in the same spot this guy was in. I jumped up, still feeling a bit dazed, and headed home. A million things were running through my mind, knowing my wife was not going to believe what had just happened to me. I just knew that I was going to be in trouble. I finally make it home and try to open the door, but my keys wouldn't work. Okay, this is weird, I thought. Suddenly, a guy opens the door and asks, "Can I help you?" Keep in mind, I've never seen this guy before. I asked him who he was, and why he was in my house, and where is my wife. Looking confused, he answered, "Son, we've lived in this house for 8 years. We moved in 2011. Even more confused, I asked, "What do you mean? It is 2011. My wife and I just bought this house earlier this month." About this time, a woman walked up to him, I can only assume it was his wife, and whispered something into his ear. About the same time, a cop was pulling into the driveway. I'm guessing that's what she was telling him, that she had called the police. They took my wallet, knife and gun and placed it on the hood of a squad car. The police questioned me and the other guy separately, comparing our stories in just as much as confusion as we had. The other guy gave the police all of the proper paperwork to prove his side and was relieved to go back inside of the house. All the attention was then turned back to me. I told them I wasn't crazy, to just look at my wallet. I told them to look at my ID and to look at the serial number on my gun. That neither would lie. They opened my wallet and laid everything out. There was nothing but old newspaper clippings and nothing in particular. No ID was there. The serial number on my gun came back clean. It wasn't stolen. But there was also no name of the owner either. Frustrated, I told them, "Look, it's been a long day. Can you just drive me to where my father-in-law's house is and I'll clear this up?" The police officers looked at each other, then back at me and said sure. 15 minutes later, we pulled into my father-in-law's driveway. A smile came across my face and I breathed a sigh of relief. Like a brick was lifted off my chest. Everything was as I explained to the officers, and soon everything was going to be okay. One of the officers knocked on my father-in-law's door to talk to him as the other officer and I waited outside. A few minutes later, the officer and my father-in-law walked outside to join us. My father-in-law looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, "Sir, this officer told me everything that's going on. I can't imagine what you're going through. I don't know how to tell you this, but I don't know you. I did have a daughter, but she died in a car accident 4 years ago. She had never been married and didn't have any children. I don't know how you know these things about me or what kind of sick game this is, but you need to leave. My heart sank. What in the world is going on, I thought. The officers apologised, thanked him for his time, and then we left. I asked where we was going, to which they replied, to the station to figure this out. I begged them for one last try, for them to please call my dad. If anyone could make sense of this, it was going to be my dad. I gave the officer my dad's information, his name, his number, the whole 9 yards. They pulled over, called him, and told him everything. You could hear my dad yelling. He definitely wasn't happy, and he too thought this was nothing but a sick joke. He screamed, "I have no idea who this guy is, or how he knows me. The only son I ever had, my ex-wife miscarried over 30 years ago. I suffer with that loss daily, and what you're doing to me is wrong, sick and twisted." There were a few choice words he screamed as well before he hung up on the officer. So I sit here in this mental hospital or asylum, whatever you want to call it, as nothing more than just John Doe. I'm not writing this thinking anyone will believe me, because no one else has. I'm writing this in hopes that the right person will read this and know who I am. This story was taken from Mortis Media subreddit. I'm not claiming this story to be true, but I just thought it was an interesting story, so I thought I'd put it in here.
My life has been turned upside down and backwards many times. So many times, in fact, that I wonder why the twists seem to take the shape that it has so repetitively. With the last several years culminating in several life changes that started when I was a child. Introspection set in, and I began to really sift through the years seeking answers, or at the very least, some kind of clues. Nearly going blind will do that to you. Nearly dying several times didn't seem to be the ticket. But those are tales for another time. The differences in my life from others I know has been so dramatic that in the growing darkness of my sight, I began to try and piece things together. I was always different. Going back into my memories, the differences begin right away. No one else I know can remember their first steps, getting their diapers changed, the distaste for the feel of plastic pants over their underpants as they are potty trained, the first feel and silence of being sat in a depression of snow at 10 or 11 months. I could read well before entering kindergarten because of my mother's teachings, since she labelled everything with the same name of the thing in our shared bedroom, even in my crib. Yes, I can clearly remember those times, even the abuses my parents and elder siblings sent my way, though those didn't ramp in intensity until after I was back home and turned 6 years old. Forgive me, I'm getting slightly ahead of myself, but with reason, as you will eventually find out. As to the blindness that I avoided, which you've undoubtedly been asking yourself about, trauma-induced cataracts from concussive impacts to my head, from beatings and car accidents. No, not when I was driving. These happened when I was a child, and before the law and normal use of seatbelts stepped in to protect us from ourselves. Now, needless to say, this is all completely true. I know you'll all wonder if this is the case. As I am a child of two nations, born in the US, this means a large amount of my cultural background goes into the sum of my parts, with a Cuban father and a mother from England. You can see what an amazing contrast there would be between the two parts of my family. The differences are so vast, with one half being very spiritual, Santeria being a large part of the religious makeup of the Cuban side, and on the other is the Celtic influence of my mother's family, with deep ties to the old faiths of the islands of the United Kingdom, all the way back to the old religion of pagans and druids. As a baby, I never knew how protected I was by my tias, which means aunts in Spanish, and their diligence to keep the house that we lived in safe from the other world that they knew was there, and feared terrifically in fact. Constant blessings, use of camphor, holy water, and cleansing with incense happened all the time. They kept my dreams untroubled, and I feared the dark only because I could not see. Eventually we moved, and the home I would grow up in did not have any of those benefits, as I began to see things in the darkness most easily. Aside from feeling things, when I was near something spiritually active at a distance, I could see things too. Take for example my Uncle Mickey and his wife Olga. As a little child, we'd go there all the time because Auntie Olga was my godmother. Her mother lived with them, but had her own room, and was very old and in not the best of health. But she had an aura about her that said that she was kindly, and wished that she could do more when my brothers and sisters and I came to visit than just sit in her room or lie in bed. Sometimes, she'd be too exhausted to get out of bed, and we would have to play quietly on the other side of the house on the covered porch. I had a habit of wandering off and going places that I was told not to go, following feelings that seemed to draw me. In fact, sometimes I would wander blocks away from home or from parks, scaring my family silly. I would go to my tia Olga's mother's room, and as I'd walk in, a man standing next to her bed would look up and smile at me most of the time. My memory of him is hazy now, as it is of her, but I remember dark but warm eyes, steely grey hair swept back and slicked back down to keep it neat with a light blue guayabera. He was thick in the upper body, muscular, but not overly so. I couldn't see his lower body, since he was on the other side of the bed. She would look away from him to me, following his gaze, and see me standing in the doorway. I would greet her, "Hola, señora," and then my Uncle Mickey said something from behind me to get my attention. I'd look, to turn to see what he said, and when I'd look back, the figure, the man that I had just seen, would be gone. There was no place for him to go, I should point out, and no one else lived there since my cousin, Michael, had moved out some years before. Keep in mind these events happened when I was 4. No one would ever tell me who that was. No one wanted to even mention it. The fact is, it only started whispers between adults about the events. Fearfully whispered discussions amongst them. Discussions that I was not even allowed to think on eavesdropping on. It wasn't long after that my Aunt Olga passed away. I never found out who the man was in the room with her, but I was assuming it was someone very close to her, for the simple fact that I never felt menaced by what I saw, and the room felt brighter as she passed. My mother's relations had come to visit us for a little while, and I do believe I even got to see my great Aunt Lily more than once in the US. My mother's father, Granddad, had been setting aside money since she'd left home to have her come home, either to stay or for a long visit, and this money he'd saved up from quitting smoking. Funnily enough, he'd been saving for so long that the amount had grown high enough for us all to come visit them during the summer. My father had to work, so he couldn't come with us. His job was very demanding, and our talismans, given to us by the Cuban side of our family, were not allowed to come with us, and remained in a box back home, despite our loud protestations. My mother was most insistent, as she was embarrassed by them. My time in England was not boring. We walked everywhere, or took buses or trains, and we were dragged to every mall, castle, monument and palace of interest that my mother could think of. This is in direct contrast to the part of Los Angeles where we lived, that required a car and a long trip to get anywhere meaningful. It was a shock, to say the very least. All of this whilst travelling between homes of my granddad and Nanny, that's my grandmother, and my Aunt Sonia and Aunt Celia in various places around the country. When we first went to stay with our Aunt Celia, it was a bit of a shock. Upon first stepping through the front door and removing our Wellington boots, I noticed that the air was thick and cold. To the left of the large front door was a toilet behind a closed door under a large staircase with a banister. My eyes were drawn to it as we were led inside by my aunt, distracted with talking to my mother about her coming wedding. Another reason for our presence, so my mother would be there for her younger sister's wedding. The cold stopped as we got to the third stair and turned right onto the landing and proceeded up the stairs. Now the air was just thick and unwelcoming. We were shown to our rooms, the ones that we would be sleeping in. Us children. It was across the hall from Celia's room and next to my mother's room. I kept looking at the door to my aunt's room, a pulsing sensation in my ears and pressing on my chest. So distracted was I that I didn't even notice I was being asked something by my mother as she ushered me into the room to unpack. Celia smiled at me as she opened the door to her room. Something about getting into her regular clothing now that she was not travelling anymore that day. I looked past her into the room with eyes wide and the feeling of dread growing. She saw my curiosity. "What is it, Sean?" she asked. I looked past her shoulder into the room. Past her, I could see her bed and nothing else. I looked back at her as she entered the room, and then walked out of sight to the right, towards what I would later learn was the walk-in wardrobe. During this, she crossed my view of the bed, and when it was clear enough again, I saw something that chilled me to the marrow, and the pressure came back enough to make me gasp. There, in the bed, now, sat an old woman in a sleeping cap and nightgown that looked like someone out of the 18th century. Her hair was grey and tied up in the cap. Her skin was parched and wrinkled. She couldn't have been older than 70. The woman was sitting there in the bed, looking in the direction that Celia had walked out of my field of view. Then slowly she turned to look at the doorway. It seemed at the time that she was turning her head at the sound of my gasp. Her eyes were angry and unwelcoming. At that moment my sister and mother walked past, breaking my line of sight. As they walked past to go down the stairs to get the rest of their suitcases and unpack, I stood frozen, my brother asking me what was wrong as they walked by. And after they'd passed, the woman was nowhere to be seen. I told no adult, nor my sister, as I remembered the response seeing things like this had gotten me in the past. I confided in my brother only, and he told me that he hadn't seen anything. He proceeded to tell my mother and sister all about it. During the rest of our stay, I kept my eyes averted from her room so that I wouldn't have to risk seeing that woman again, and refused to use the upstairs bathroom, and I'd have to pass her and risk seeing or feeling her presence again. My grandparents' flat had no oppressive feel to it, but there was a ghost all the same. A figure would walk into the bedroom where my brother and I slept, look around, and then leave. He was dressed in an odd helmet, shaped like a brimmed soup bowl, with a chain strap and a strange heavy jacket, with leather buckles that looked water resistant. I could never see his feet, as it was always too dark in the room. As the man entered, he always seemed to bring light with him, almost as if he glowed mildly. Otherwise I would not have been able to see much of him in the middle of the night. I have no idea if I woke each time he came, but when I did wake, it was usually prefaced by that feeling that I thought my mother had just walked up to check in on my brother and I, which she did now and again. It's important to note that my mother had a fear for graveyards. She's been tracing our family tree for ages, and this meant that we were usually dragged to find headstones with her maiden name on it. One particular grave near my grandfather's flat was apparently where my great-grandparents were buried. The graveyards were never empty of people walking through and looking around. We'd be there many times, clearing the weeds and bracken from the shared grave of my great-grandparents and placing flowers there before I asked my mother why so many people were milling about. Her answer was, "I don't know, Sean, what people?" She asked as she looked around, finally paying attention to what I asked her. As the youngest in the family, I'm rarely listened to, and almost everything I say was dismissed outright or ignored. Never before had I wished that my mother had ignored my question. I looked up at the people who were walking amongst the graves and pointed at them. Specifically, I pointed to a girl with reddish hair tied up in a pink ribbon, that was wearing a light sweater and a dress that dropped to her knees. We were in our rain gear, and this girl and all the others were not. They were all in different attire. They looked dressy, such as suits and dresses, whilst others were dressed casually. Some looked like they were dressed in the current clothing style. Some were considerably older. I had not noticed it from before that moment. Further, not a single one of them had an umbrella or rain gear of any kind. It was at that moment that I realized two things. Ghosts can appear in the daylight and outside, because as a child, I assumed that being outside and being daytime meant I was safe from them. But I was wrong. These ghosts had suddenly become aware of me, all of them, as if they were discomforted at scaring me. They all turned to look at me with an impassive expression on their faces, except for the girl I pointed at, and then each of them turned away and faded from sight. It was almost as if they had pulled a screen in front of themselves, or stepped from one room to another by changing the focus of their attention. The girl with the reddish hair and the pink ribbon, she didn't disappear. Instead, she smiled and stayed fairly close, listening to our conversation and watching, all in a completely non-threatening manner. No one seemed to notice her throughout the whole time we were there, which I was eager to cut as short as possible. Threatening or not, I was leery of her and unwilling to let her be close, always keeping my mother between us. I have no idea who she was, and I was too scared to find out or even try to talk to her. Funnily enough, the church for that graveyard is where my Aunt Cecilia was married that summer. That's where my grandfather was buried when he died of a massive heart attack in his flat in August, just after my mother's birthday. And no, I never saw him again. His spirit, despite staying in the flat for many more days, never came to me. Nor, might I add, did the man in the helmet ever appear for me again. I'm sure most of this seems innocent as far from dangerous for you guys, but you have to see it from the point of view of a 5-year-old child. Not only that, you'd have to understand that before this, I'd never encountered so many so often. I'd only ever seen things swirling or faces peeking out of my closet. But there was so much to be seen in England, ever more so. Though we stayed with the relations, we never went to stay with my Uncle Billy. We did, however, get some chance to visit distant relations, distant in both lineage and in mileage. One set was in Scotland, and with nothing spiritually noteworthy to say, except that I felt safe, almost as if I were back in my old home, as though something was protecting me. But the scariest experience I had was visiting our cousins Glenys and Roy. They were a nice couple, with a home that had a past, that had no clear answer for. At my aunt's wedding, we were told by my Aunt Celia about the ghost of the bed. It was an antagonistic spirit, that menaced with only male adults that slept in the bedroom, shaking them with shrieks and attacking them in other more painful ways. They look into the history of the house, and it went back about 200 years, being one of the oldest homes in Wales, with a history rich and mostly lost through time. Of course, Roy had only been told these things and never tried to sleep there himself. A friend of his had tried and left in the middle of the night, never to return. No one stepped forward with more information as to why the spirit did what it did, whether it was male or female, or what had brought its darkness into the home in the first place. All this was recounted by Celia with dark glee, as she looked onto the paranormal. Terrified at what I might end up seeing, the trip to Wales was long and arduous, as we had to stay on the train for several hours and make a few changes and then ride a bus. Before it was all over, I had been menaced by my sister and brother with the idea of ghosts in the house. Ghosts they didn't believe in or could see. Menaced with the idea of being put into a bedroom I was so scared of sleeping in. You know that's how it is with children. We're going to put you in there, Sean. We're going to make you sleep upstairs with the ghost. They'd torment me, them wailing like ghosts, holding their hands up, making poses like a revenant out for human blood. I'd wail and run, scared out of my wits, already at the knowledge that I was going to be near it. Certain, in fact, despite my mother's claims that they wouldn't, and that they wouldn't make me sleep in that accursed room. I passed out on the last bus, despite trying to stay awake in order to make sure I was able to make certain that I was not put in the wrong room. My siblings had a nasty habit that once they knew about the ghosts I could see, they'd lock me in closets just to hear me shrieking in the dark. And it was sometimes not void of others. I was scared that they would force me into the room and make me face their threats. My fears were in vain, as they never did go through with it. I awoke slowly and softly to find myself in a bed already, despite the fact that I could tell by the ambient light that it was still daytime. It was also sunny outside. I was covered in a thick blanket that almost felt as heavy as one of those lead coats they throw on you when you get an X-ray at the dentist's office. It was warm and comfortable, and for several seconds I realized where I was. Then terror blossomed in my chest as my heart began to hammer against my little ribcage. I sat up, struggling under the weight of the blanket. Sitting up, I looked around the room. The bed was old, and I could hear the spring shafts as I did. The headboard was metal, rather like the kind that you see in old movies of hospitals, but it was much larger and wider. It seemed so large to me at the time, disproportionately big for a child of my small stature. To my right was a window within the pull-down, shade drawn from the lintel to within the inch of the sill. I could tell the window was open because of the way the shade moved slightly now and then from the air flowing around it, causing the sun that was coming in to vary in intensity. Under the window was a low chest of drawers made of dark stained wood. It looked antique and sturdy, and to my left was a tall dresser that was at least 4 feet high but with no mirror on it, also made of dark stained wood, that made me feel frightened for some reason by the lack of mirror. Directly besides the bed on the left was a nightstand made of lighter wood with a single drawer in it. I heard the sound of my family downstairs laughing loudly at something. It seemed to come up to me, as if to mock me, teasing me. Almost like I were put there on purpose or to test me, to torture me and to expose my fears. But after all, to them it was not real. It was explained away as imagination. How many times by my mother since coming to England? I'd lost count, and I could hear my brother and sister laughing at something. The low voice of Roy interjecting something now and again between the bursts of laughter. Well, I thought, I'll show them. I'll get away. I'll call them stupid and mean for trying to scare me and laugh about me, always picking on me, the smallest of the family, the butt of their insults and tortures. How many times had they locked me in a closet, with things reaching for me in the dark, or in a room with ghosts that could see me as well as I could see them, all in the name of helping me get over my fears. Tears began tracing down my face as I thought of this, but now they intensified from drops to streams that blurred my sight as my horror and feeling of betrayal intensified. My cheeks were soaked and stung slightly from the hot, salty tears. I moved to get up, but paused. I felt it then. Through the whole of my body I felt it, like suddenly I was deep underwater. The pressure was intense, and almost like a nightmare in intensity. Like drowning out of water, sinking deeper and deeper every second. The crushing feeling, growing tighter and tighter around me, pressing on my little chest. My shoulders creaked as they were forced into my body, and my wrists were crushed into my stomach. Almost as if a gigantic hand was gripping me. Looking back now, I have no idea how I survived. I tried to move, but my arms could not defend whatever it was that held me. Another chorus of laughter from underneath the door drew my attention downwards, and I could see the gap beneath the door, with the light from the hallway illuminating a small patch of wooden carpet, and the edge of the rug on which the bed sat on. Fighting to draw enough breath to scream for my mother, all I could do was sip the little air at the time into my lungs and let it out. I tried to make noise, little gasps for help. "Mummy!" and calling for my sister and brother. But looking back, they couldn't have been louder than a whimper. They were far from where I was, and downstairs, and they would probably ignore me if they could, as they usually did. I felt betrayed, as well as terrified beyond comprehension, but it wasn't even close to what I was in for. A sound, distant but persistent and strange, reached my ears, and then in the silence of the room, it didn't echo. It seemed as though the sound was sucked away as soon as each sound finished. It grew steadily louder, and by the time I could tell it was getting closer, the grip hadn't lessened on me, and in fact, began to push down so my little legs were bent at painful angles on the bed. The springs squeaked in response to my downwards pressure into the bed, and then I heard my mother say, "I think I heard Sean upstairs. I'll check on him later," going to step out for a cigarette, and it trailed off, as she must have gone outside. The sound of the door opening and closing, and then silence. They had all stepped outside, and I could now hear the sound of my brother and sister laughing distantly from the open window to my right. My right hip protested, the pain of being crushed in the semi-sitting position with my right leg splayed out on the right, and my left extended in front of me. The noise I'd heard now seemed emboldened at being alone in the house. I could finally tell, at last, what it sounded like. It was like a groan, only it sounded like a person groaning whilst inhaling rather than exhaling. And it didn't stop this time. It was inhaling and making the sound, getting louder and louder and closer, but I couldn't see from where. My eyes were now rolling around my sockets, searching every corner of the room to see if I could find the source of the sound, all whilst my mind was crying for my mother, my tears now soaking through the neck of my polo shirt in front of my chest. The groan stopped for an instant, and then began again, louder this time, as I sensed it was very near. I looked down at the doorway. Something had attracted my attention despite the new, burning pain in my chest. What attracted my gaze was the light from under the doorway, which was slowly going out. It was being blotted out, as if by shadows or something moving over the source of the left of the door to cover the light. Eventually the light was absorbed by a solid line of shadow, and I knew it could not have been a person. A person could not make this kind of completely eclipsing shadow over the light. There would be a shape of feet or legs or something. The sound was now just outside the wooden door, louder than before, and something more. It was not a single groan. It was the sound of several people. No, a chorus of them. And it sounded now almost like a painful gasping into air-starved lungs. Only it never paused to finish, taking the perpetual inward breath. The groan didn't sound like it stemmed from pain. No. It sounded almost like an engine getting going, as if it was drawing something it wanted into it. The louder it got, the more I hurt at the pressure of the crushing sensation. As I watched, the shadow over the light was taken by something darker, and it began to slide under the door. It was darker and fuller than before. I could see an amorphous mass sliding underneath the door that was darker than midnight, and it entered the room. The sunlight that came in and around the shade in the window grew dimmer. The pressure on my chest surged angrily as I was suddenly flung back in the bed and banged my head against the slated metal headboard, which in turn smashed the wall. The sound of it, though, should have been loud, but it sounded like a muffled clunk to me, as if the sound had been sucked away or muffled underwater or with a pillow. My head, now dazed from the collision, was too loopy and weak from lack of oxygen to appreciate the reality that I could now breathe. All thoughts of escape had long gone, and I wanted my mother to come and rescue me, to drive it off and protect me, to enfold me in her arms. But I realized that this would not happen. Despite her promises, she put me here and allowed me to be in there, and either way, she didn't really care about me. Blarily turning my gaze downwards, I watched the foot of the bed for signs as I prayed. Let me die fast so it can't touch me or take me. Please just let me die. I was so scared that all my limbs had gone cold from shock. The groaning started at an all-new intensity, revving upwards in the chorus of sounds, and my eyes grew wider in terror as the dark mass now surged upwards in the air as if standing. And it didn't even stop. It stood all spread out as if oozing into the air, sucking the warmth and oxygen from the room, the light growing dimmer and darker as I laid there, numbly panting in ultimate terror. My thighs grew hot as my urine burst free into my jeans and ran out of my pants and onto the bedding. The groaning changed, as if almost overjoyed, a triumphant tone, and it spread to the right and left like bat wings, reaching around to engulf me in its wicked hungry embrace. Please, 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 I realized I was panting, begging as my tears blurred my vision. The mass moved to the bed, and it slowly began to engulf me. All I heard was the groaning. It filled my ears, and then seemed to crawl into my head and echo there. A fresh weave of tears made it all, so I saw a blur and the cold feeling in all my limbs. My head propped at a strange angle against the headboard, forcing me to watch as it closed in. The anticipation of its icy touch on my already cold skin repulsed me, and I began to shiver uncontrollably. Then, just before I knew it was going to touch me, my vision cleared, and I could see that it was about to touch my shoulders and embrace me. The noise it made surged one last time, bestial sounds of the predator about to make a kill. But it was all suddenly blotted out of the intense, white-hot agony on the top of my head. A burning, watery feeling that was very intense happened at the top of my head. Wave upon wave of heat. An agony, like the top of my head had just been sawed open with a welding torch. But it didn't fade, and it was as if the room filled up with blinding white light, so bright that my eyes had automatically been drawn to slits to protect them. The whole room was filled with it, except for the Steigen patch of nightmare before me on the bed. It had halted in mid-reach and was now illuminated completely. I could somehow tell it was in pain. Now I could see it entirely, and I wished to heavens I never did. The thing was made up of the faces, images and bodies, all black against black but easily discernible, all caught mid-scream or wail or groan, in some position of pain or writhing, contorted in agony, moving slowly within the mass, undulating to the tone of their own trapped misfortune, all moulded together into a thin sheet of ultimate darkness, pressed into a fabric of utter damnation. This thing wanted me to be part of it. I just knew it. And though what it was may have once been human and had the potential for love and mercy, all that was left was the desire to add more to its flock of tortured souls. I have realized since then that the faces I saw, the darkness that it was all merely a covering for the real force behind it, the thing hiding behind the curtain of souls. The light in the room intensified, and the burn to my scalp lessened at last, allowing me to move slightly. The mass leapt off the bed and seemed to be sucked under the door, all while thrashing left and right. It passed into the hallway, and the groaning sound receded as sounds from the outside and the light returned to the room. I could hear my siblings playing and my mother talking to Glynis about something. The light was dimming finally, and I looked around the room to see where it was coming from, weakly swiveling my head to try and find the glimpse of the source. But it was against the wall. Nothing should have been able to be behind me, and that's exactly where it always seemed to be. My strength, what little the light had imparted, was flooding out of me rapidly. The thing was gone and I wanted to escape and get out of the room. Now, reaching my right arm to the left edge of the bed, I tried to grab onto it and pull myself out. I failed as the last of the light and the burning sensation fled me. I tumbled out of bed, heading onto the floor. I don't remember hitting the floor. In fact, I don't remember what happened for the next 3 days. My next memories were that, heading away from the train station in her town and on our way to her house. It took a long time to piece together the story, but here's what I know. They thought I'd fallen out of bed after peeing on it on the first day. I'd gotten up, cleaned myself off, and my mother found me half-clothed trying to change the sheets. They fed us supper. I ate heartily at the wonderful food that Glynis had cooked, and then we'd gone to bed. Throughout it all, I acted normally. That was that, but I remembered none of it. Perhaps it was the shock. What I do remember was eating the Welsh cakes that Glynis had made herself. Even made me a snack to eat. That my brother didn't like them, and that my sister was trying to stay in shape for gymnastics. You can say I'm delusional, or that I'm not sane. You can say anything you like. I was never more scared than I was that day. Because I was a little boy, but I know what I saw. In case you're wondering, did it stay in that house? No. In fact, Glynis and Roy said that after we were there, during a visit to the US before they moved to New Zealand, someone across the street had died, and they figured it had gone to follow the person. Roy slept in the room once to make sure nothing had happened. I had a different take on things, but never spoke to them of what I knew. Wasn't worthwhile telling them that the thing followed me and made my life hell. Guilt never solved anything. I don't know what it was, I didn't care to name it. Give it a name if you need one, I couldn't care less. What I do care about is from that day, my life went different. It couldn't get to me, so my family turned dark. I don't know if it was the thing that wouldn't let the people sleep, or the tale that we were told. What I care about is that my family went from being what it was, to cruel and vicious. After we came home, the darkness got to my father. I know this because he beat me until I was unable to control my body function, and even gave me a concussion. All on Christmas Day of 1977. Merry Christmas. And why? Because I accidentally opened the wrong present. Car accidents followed. My father began to drive angry, regularly. I nearly went through a windshield with a full backpack at age 9. The only thing stopping me was the fact that the window wasn't made to shatter. 1970s construction. Gotta love it. My mother began to regularly dish out damage to me because my siblings would blame me for things and wanted to see me get punished. My siblings began to use me as a whipping boy when they were upset. It made me feel worthless, and I withdrew from their presence as much as I could. This seemed to make them more antagonistic. My brother acted as if he were always being edged on to find anything that he could to get away with hitting me on the head with. This even included putting a metal nut on his finger and lashing out at my head when no one was looking, especially the top of my head. Complaining to my mother was useless. The only solace I had in this time came from my Cuban grandfather Papacito. He would protect me when I was near him. I was safest from all of them. Naturally, this dark thing made sure he was gone as soon as possible. My parents divorced suddenly, and my mother drove off my aunts and grandparents. Despite the fact that they lived next door to us, she found a way to make them move. After that point, cataracts started to form, and though I could see spiritual things somewhat as dim outlines, I could not see them as clearly as before. No longer did they look like normal people. Now I have ocular implants, and I can see as well as any of you can see. Mostly. A few more laser treatments, and no more cataracts. And my ability to see ghosts is as it was when I was 5. I know this because I was shopping one day after my first surgery, and left my eye unbandaged 2 days prior. A little girl ran past me, giggling, and knocked over produce as I watched, then ran through a cart loaded with produce as if it wasn't there. The person stocking the produce, a little dour-looking Hispanic lady, never looked up to follow her. She only humphed in annoyance and picked up the peppers, putting them back where they belonged. I asked if she saw the girl, and she gave me a puzzled look. You may be wondering, does misfortune follow me still? And are my steps dodged by this thing? No. Thankfully it's gone now, and with good reason I might add. But that, as they say, is another story.
Hello everyone, I hope you'll enjoy this video. This is the part of the video where I just waffle for a little while, so there's no more stories at this point. Even though I still got to record some stories for the rest of the video, I'm actually just recording this bit now because I can't really record anymore because my brain's just gone to mush. But I don't know if any of you can tell in the stories, but it's really difficult to record at the moment because there's so much noise going on. Where it's lockdown in England, everyone's indoors, so it's like there's just so much noise in my house, and like I live next to a main road, so there's just constantly cars going past all the time. It's really annoying. They like rev their engines really loud, or like where I live, there was this is weird. It doesn't happen often either. There's these gypsies near where I live, and they ring this bell going down my road for like they just go really slow, like 5 miles an hour, all the way down the road, ringing a bell, trying to get people to bring their like scrap metal and stuff out. So like I was in the middle of one of these stories, and that started. I thought, for God's sake, like I just can't seem to get the right time to record. Like there's always birds chirping outside, but like that's always been the case where I live. I don't know if you've ever heard it in the videos, but that's not a sound effect I've added in. It's genuinely like, if I be quiet for a second now. Oh yeah, so as soon as I stop talking, they stop. Wait. I don't know if you can hear that, but yeah, they're still going. They're really annoying, but I'm just used to them now. But yeah, so that's not a sound effect I had in. There's genuinely birds outside chirping constantly. Yeah, but I'm probably done about 20 minutes of recording so far. Of like the actual, like, when I edit it'll be like 20 minutes. I've done like an hour so far. I just make so many mistakes that I have to edit it for ages. If any of you guys have any stories that you want to email me, preferably true stories, then my email I'll put in the description of this video. It's mrguy97@outlook.com. So if any of you want to send me any of your true stories, then I'm more than happy to read them on this channel, because it can take quite some time for me to get permission for stories. Where I'm not like a huge channel that gets like hundreds of thousands of views, I don't get many submissions, so I have to like search the internet and get permission for my stories, so that can be quite time consuming. So if any of you do actually have stories that I can use, then I would really appreciate that, and it would save me a lot of time, to be honest. But yeah, that's the reason that making themed videos is quite difficult, because you have to get permission from all across the internet, and it can just take so long. But yeah, recently YouTube's done this thing for some reason where they don't really notify people when I upload, and also they've not been putting my videos in the recommended search at all, pretty much, so my views have been terrible recently, but I don't really care that much. But it's annoying when you put a lot of effort into like a video and it doesn't get the normal amount of viewership that it would normally get. So like, say if I got like 4,000 views in a narration, I'm happy with that, because I feel like that's like where my like the amount of viewership I normally would have, if you know what I mean, consistently over the years. So like 4,000 or 5,000 per video, I'm really happy with that. Like I think that's like the sort of fan base I have, like not fan base, I don't like calling it that, it's cringy, innit? Like viewership that I have. But that's like the sort of, yeah, like the standard for my sort of video, I think, like 4,000 or 5,000, but I'm not getting there at the moment because YouTube don't want to recommend anything, and they don't put anything in the sub boxes anymore. So it's like people just have to be on my channel pretty much to see my videos, or like a very small percentage of you actually get notified. So if you can, would you guys be able to turn on the bell icon so you get notifications for my videos, because they just don't seem to be putting anything out at the moment. Like it's really frustrating, because I can spend hours and hours on a video. Like this video here is going to take me like 8 hours in total probably, like from start to finish. And then it's so frustrating when like YouTube just, their system messes up. So it's like sometimes I'll upload a video, and you guys probably don't even know this, I'll upload a video, I'll come back in an hour and it's got 4 views, and I'm like, what's going on? Do you know what I mean? Like they're not actually putting it in people's subscription box, and it's so frustrating as well, because my videos take a long time to make, they take a long time to render too. So like if I upload my video onto YouTube, it literally takes like an hour and a half for the thing to go and upload fully and process. So it's so annoying when you have to like delete it and then do it all over again and add in like everything else in. It's just so frustrating. Recently I found YouTube very frustrating. Like I like, to be honest, I enjoy the end product of a video, but the whole process sometimes is very draining. Like I enjoy narrating the stories, but sometimes it's just the stuff that comes with it I don't enjoy. Like the stuff with YouTube, like when I've had times where YouTube just like completely demonetized me, and like for no reason. Like literally, like it's not like I earn loads of money off YouTube anyway, but like the little that I do get off of it is nice to like have, you know, because at the minute it's difficult to get a job in England and everything, and I'm at uni right now, so this little bit of money is really useful. It's not like I'm getting like thousands of pounds off of YouTube. I'm getting nowhere near that. So it's like, it's just frustrating. They like completely removed my monetization. It was only through a couple of people helping me with like tweets and stuff to YouTube that I got my monetization back. And it's like one thing after another with YouTube, to be honest with you. I've just done enough of it. Like I'll keep uploading videos for you guys, but I can't stand YouTube at the minute. They really just the way they their whole system works doesn't sort of, it doesn't reward quality sort of content. I'm not saying my videos are brilliant or quality or anything, but like they're very time consuming. They take a lot of effort to do. It's not like something I can just pump out in every single day, and it's like, do you know what I mean? Like they take time to research for the stories, get permission for the stories, record the stories, edit the stories, you know, just all the stuff that comes with it. Like it's not something that can be done like every single day, like twice a day, like a reaction video or something where people just pump it out, or like FIFA videos where people just pump them out all day. Like these things take a lot of time, but they don't get rewarded with anything, because YouTube wants the sort of people that can upload like 10 videos a week, whereas I can't. I don't have the time to upload 10 videos a week, but like the videos I do upload take probably 10 times as long as some of these like FIFA videos to do, with people just all react to something and upload it straight away. Like it's just the whole system of YouTube annoys me. It doesn't reward effort, it rewards people that can pump out as much shit as they possibly can, which is really frustrating. But I've known this for years, but I just enjoy watching, like, I enjoy watching content that's like, you can tell a lot of effort's gone into it, if you know what I mean. Like, not everything has to have loads of effort, but like, it's frustrating when you see other people that do the same thing as you, but they're not getting the credit they deserve either, or like the reputation, or the sort of, what's the word, just sort of the rewards from YouTube. Like, they're not reaping any of the benefits from YouTube, which is really frustrating, which is why I've got my podcast too. I love the podcasting more than YouTube at the moment, because it's just so much less hassle. Like, they don't fanny around with everything all the time, like changing things all the time, and like all this age restricting stuff. Like, my stuff keeps getting demonetized, but there's nothing really in my videos that's that bad. Like, there's so much worse on YouTube, but like things like my videos are getting like shadow banned and everything. It's just frustrating, to be honest. I'm sorry for this rant. I know it sounds like a bit stupid probably, but I'll never talk about this stuff to anyone, so it's quite nice just to talk about it with you guys. But yeah, I don't know, sometimes I get frustrated. I do love YouTube, like, I love talking to you guys. This is the only bit of it I actually love, is like talking to you guys, really. Like, I enjoy interacting with all of you and your comments and everything. I don't really care about anything else on there. Like, the money's nice, obviously, and yet that annoys me as well. Do you know when people go on about like not caring about money at all? It's like, well, you do though, don't you? You clearly do. Like, why would no one want money? It's like, I'm saying, I only do it for the passion. It's like, well, then why have you got monetization on? Because you want money as well. There's nothing wrong with wanting money. Do you know what I mean? I don't know why people care so much about it, saying he's only doing it for money. So, well, obviously, if someone could get like I don't, but say if like other people, big narration channels, getting like 100 grand a year of narrating stories, why would you not? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't, but good on them. Like, if they could do that, do you know what I mean? Like, it annoys when people are like, oh, I only do it for the love of doing it. It's like, yeah, you love doing it, but you love the money as well. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't know why you have to lie, but yeah, I don't know. I'm proper waffling on. I probably woke up in a bit of a dodgy mood today, really. I think it's because I've been in lockdown for so long. I don't know. But I was going to, on a more positive note, what can I talk about? Do you know what? I've been trying to save money recently, and I've actually done quite a good job. Like, I don't really spend much money on myself, but when I do spend money, I don't know about you guys, in the space of like a week, I'll spend most of the budget that I'd set myself for a month, but then I could go like another 3 weeks and spend like £30 or something, like spend like hardly anything. It's weird. I'm not a very, like, I don't need much to be happy, if you know what I mean. Like, I'd happily spend like £20 a month for myself sometimes, but that's it. Then other months I would just, I don't spend much money because I'm really tight, but I was saying it's like £200. I'm like, really want it, but then I think to myself, like, you don't need it. Like, especially at the minute, I'm not even going outside, so what is the point in me like spending a load of money on things? There's literally no point. Also, what do you guys think of, this is a weird one, Listerine? I've got some here, right, and your mouth feels really weird after having it. Like, you feel refreshed, but like this one, mint and green tea. Why would you want green tea in a mouthwash? That's disgusting, isn't it? Like, the cold green tea doesn't sound nice anyway, but especially not in a mouthwash. That sounds awful. You can't taste it anyway. It's like when they do like the flavoured vodka, isn't it? Like, you get like raspberry flavoured vodka. It's like, well, it doesn't taste like raspberry, does it? It just tastes like fucking Domestos or fucking cyanide or something. It's awful. You can't taste bloody raspberry in vodka, can you? And why would you want, like, who goes like, oh, I really want a mint vodka? It's like, you can't taste it anyway. It's horrible. It just burns your throat. But yeah, I probably waffled on for far too long now. I actually really enjoy this. I could probably sit down for another hour doing this, but I know you guys are pretty fed up, and probably most of you have turned off. But yeah, I do love you guys. I really appreciate all your support. Sorry for ranting this time. Like, I know I normally talk about more normal stuff, but this has just been on my mind recently. So, I mean, yeah, that's what I've been talking about. So, anyway, hope to see you guys in the next video, and yeah, have a good week.